Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. America's political culture is coming apart. The rhetoric is rapidly getting harsher, in case you haven't noticed. It's getting more venomous. And most ominously, it is becoming more racialized. Riots over race and politics were virtually unheard of 10 years ago in this country. Sadly, now they are common. We're living in a scary time, and people know it. A new Fox poll found that 81% of voters think the bonds that hold this country together are weakening. Just a decade ago, people joked about letting states secede from the Union or splitting the country into two along political lines. None of that sounds very funny anymore, or even far-fetched at this point. So at a volatile moment like this, the last thing this country needs is more demagoguery, especially racial demagoguery, which always leaves the deepest and longest-lasting wounds. On the other hand, whipping people into a frenzy of fear and rage is a guaranteed ratings bonanza, and CNN can never resist that. Watch how that network takes the controversy over the national anthem at football games and turns it into a terrifying story about race hatred.
If anyone actually believes this is about the flag, then you must believe Rosa Parks' protest was about a bus. Think about that.
When he says, he was really telling the owners, like the owners or the plantation owners and the guys playing the league, you know, they're on the plantation, you can't say anything. And so the thing has really escalated.
It does sound a little bit, and obviously you can come at me on Twitter about this, like he's saying, control your dog. Control your dog to the owners. And now he says they're fearful of the players. So he is setting up the ugliest kind of tension that you can. And I know when you say control your dog, it's got a lot of racial overtones to it. So does this situation. Yeah. I don't know how you can look at it and not see how it's racial.
Dogs? Who said anything about dogs? Nobody did, but it doesn't matter. The image is horrifying, and that's the point. You can't turn away from that. Now, do you hate and fear your neighbor a little more by the end of that segment? Of course you do. Imagine millions of people watching that kind of thing all day long. What would happen to the country? We're finding out now. Monique Presley is an attorney. She's a Democratic political commentator, and she joins us tonight. Thanks a lot, Monique, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess what bothers me is, I think it's important to have honest conversations about race, but I think you should be responsible because it has the capacity to really scare people and really hurt people and hurt the country. And so when you see a journalist on another network basically make up a quote and say, he's saying control your dogs, which nobody has ever said, and then comment upon this imaginary quote and go off on this, what's a racial thing? If I'm watching that with half, asleep, I'm terrified by the end. They shouldn't do that to people.
And perhaps you would be terrified at the end, but I'm really not interested in how Chris Cuomo's analogy may terrify people. The issue is why there are protests in the first place and the people who are living terrified every day just walking down the street. So if you look at how we got here because African American men are disproportionately stopped, disproportionately searched, disproportionately arrested, and disproportionately killed per capita in this country.
That is true.
And one brave man decided to first sit and then take a knee. Okay. The escalation didn't come into what I guess you're now calling terror. I'm not really hearing about, frankly, Tucker, a lot of people being afraid because of
let me just acknowledge that I think a lot of what you say is valid, reasonable, something that we can talk about in debate. But what I really object to and what I think is hurting the country is the demagoguery in the way that it's discussed and described on other channels, particularly on CNN. So, for example, what you just said, that African-American men are more likely to be stopped and shot, that is absolutely true. But it's a nuanced question, actually. Black men are more likely to be shot by African-American cops than by white cops. I'm not sure that proves anything, but it certainly detracts from the storyline CNN is pushing. And so when you're going to tell a story, you have to tell the whole story, or else what you're doing is you're pushing a false story designed to scare the crap out of people, and that's what they're doing.
Right, but even in what you just said, that was incorrect, because where the numbers are concerned, when you're talking about more likely, you're talking about statistics into the future. But when you look at the numbers of the race of police officers who have actually killed African American males, there have been more white officers to do it than black. black ones.
Right now.
So
and look,
it's
I'm
not
saying
a
as of right
statistical
now,
issue.
actually, what I said is true, and I'm not drawing a massive conclusion from it other than this stuff is super complicated, okay? So a lot of these cities in which this is taking place are run by African Americans, a majority African American police departments. It doesn't mean there's not racism. I'm not saying there isn't. I'm just saying add the context and don't start using dog analogies which immediately evoke pictures of Alabama 1955 and Bull Connor and all the rest, which are not designed to inform people or elucidate. They're designed to terrify and horrify people, and that's bad for the country.
I'm not sure who they're designed to terrify and horrify, though. I keep hearing you say that, and I heard in the intro where you kept saying it's scary, it's terrifying, it's horrifying.
Scary.
But the African Americans were already terrified. They're terrified of law enforcement. They're terrified that the very flag that we revere and adhere to, the very flag that symbolizes the best of freedom in this country, is the same symbol that's now being used to represent race superiority. The same symbol that's now being used
that is
to represent
your
things
opinion,
that are not
which I
freedom.
I really hope is not a majority opinion in any community, because I think it's a crackpot with respect theory. But let me give you a specific example of why this coverage has been irresponsible. Spike Lee was up there, you saw on CNN. Now,
he's not a CNN commentator. He's an
not
individual,
no, but
private
he's also
businessman,
he's also
owner,
a prolific
African-American
conspiracy
man.
nut. No, he's a conspiracy nut.
Well, and that would be an opinion,
well, no,
especially the nut part.
Well, I'll give you an example because I was there. 2006, Spike Lee said to me on television that the levees in New Orleans during Katrina were blown up in order to hurt black people. Now, I don't think he was there during Katrina. I was. As a factual matter, that didn't happen. That's crazier than anything, I don't know, Alex Jones has ever said. So you let that guy on your air.
Crazier than anything President Trump has ever said.
Look, my only point is,
this country likes conspiracy nuts right now. Maybe he'll be our next president.
Maybe that's the problem. So if you have a guy like that on who said something racially inflammatory and untrue, you should push back a little bit when he theorizes about how this is about the plantation mentality on the basis of no evidence. If you're a journalist, you got to say, whoa, can you prove that?
He used an analogy, and using an analogy that actually came to the minds of many people in African American communities and in Caucasian communities and in Latino or brown communities.
Right.
When our president, the president of this country, referred to African American citizens, tax-paying citizens who are gainfully employed, making good money in this country in the NFL as professional athletes. When he referred to them in the manner he did as sons of bitches and said that the owners ought to get those sons of bitches out of there, just drag them out of there. That language makes it seem like these owners have a proprietary interest in the bodies of these African American athletes,
I don't know what
such
school
that
you went
they
to.
can be.
Don't give
I
me
went
that
to Howard University
Look,
School of Law. Before that, I went to St. Mary's University. Proud of it. Right.
Look,
he's saying that they should be dragged out of there for a peaceful protest. The next time they get down on their knees in their peaceful, lawful protest, those SOBs ought to be dragged out of there.
That's his opinion.
Really, as the
and
president
some
of the United
these
States,
guys, hold on,
about another citizen.
Can I slow you down? Can I slow you down in your speech for 1 second? You don't like what the president said.
Well,
but I was there.
Nobody likes
but
what
I was
he said.
there.
You don't like what he said, do you?
I absolutely agree that it's divisive and offensive to attack the flag. If you've got a problem with the police,
did you think that his language was divisive and offensive?
I think that there is nothing about what he said that was explicitly racial, and I think it is immoral for you and others to pretend that you know what he was thinking when you don't.
I asked if you liked it or if it was offensive.
It was not offensive to me to have him
say
you
weren't the SOB in question.
Okay, but look, he called them SOBs. Maybe he should have done that. But the point remains, it's not a racial attack. There are white players down on one knee as well. As you know, you're ignoring that because it doesn't bolster the divisive argument you're seeking to make.
The issue that they're protesting, and the majority of the ones who are doing it in the NFL in general,
know that. They have issued no statement. You know nothing about that because they've
issued no statement about what?
About what it's about.
Okay.
The majority of players have issued no statement. Don't pretend you know because you don't.
I wasn't pretending.
Yes,
what I was saying is that the National Players Association issued a statement about it, saying what they were protesting. So they represent all of the players, and then specific players such as Colin Kaepernick, who stood out first, was protesting racial injustice
with
in
how
this country.
People treat the flag without being a racist, and you're not allowing room for that.
Right?
No one
it's
is contesting.
constitutional to denigrate the flag. You have a constitutional right to do it.
You are inserting a racial angle where none necessarily exists, and it's irresponsible. And CNN is doing it as well.
If I'm inserting it, then I'm inserting it because it's obvious to any eyes that aren't rose-colored. So it's just
that's your opinion, but it's like a news organization. But hold on, you
I don't work for CNN, so I can't defend them. But I think that what was said on this issue was true.
Do you think someone who gets up as a reporter and claims to be a conveyor of the news ought to be speculating with no evidence about the opinions or attitudes or deepest beliefs of a figure in the news? Do you think we should just make up something and say this is what he meant when we don't know that?
Well, here's the thing.
Why would you do that?
When you just said that Spike Lee was a conspiracy nut,
because he told me a conspiracy nut theory to my face.
What he said to you was what he believed to be true, and you, as a journalist, commented on it and gave your own opinion about what he said.
No, it's not my opinion. It's a factual statement. The levees were not blown up.
Conspiracy nut isn't really a factual assertion.
Actually, it is. The levees were not, we know conclusively, blown up.
And nut is just a derogatory statement.
Because that's an outrageous thing to say. And the African-American run city of New Orleans determined that was untrue. It's a lie. So he shouldn't say it because it scares the hell out of people. That's all I'm saying.
Who got scared?
I did. To think my government would blow up a levee to kill people? Are you joking? That's
grotesque. And if you're feeling any amount of fear, then it may be like a smidge close to what an African-American male is feeling just
maybe it's
driving down the block
maybe it's like people like that are making it worse. That's my point. They're making it worse. Monique, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Lawrence Jones is a host at The Blaze TV, and he joins us now. So, Lawrence, as I just said, I'm not against conversations about the police or the abuse of power, which I think is real, not just in the police, but anyone who has power tends to abuse it. And I think we should talk about that. What I'm against is people who claim to be journalists making claims they can't back up for the sake of scaring the hell out of their viewers so they'll keep watching. And that's what I see happening on CNN.
Yeah, Tucker, it's one thing to talk about, and thanks for having me, it's one thing to talk about police brutality and talk about criminal justice reform, both issues that I'm passionate about and bringing the community together. But it's another thing to accuse the president of having racist comments. And I think this is something that the left is doing to push their narrative because they know that when they do that, it rouses people's emotions. If you know anything about Donald Trump, he has no respect of a person. I mean, whether you're a woman, Cricket Hillary, Little Marco, he goes after people. He just does. And no matter what race, male or female, that's just his style. It's one thing to say you disagree with his style, but to suggest that he's racist, homophobic, or whatever label they want to put on it, I think it's just being intellectually dishonest.
Well, I think it is too, and I don't even think it's about Trump. I may be the only person in America who's not even that deeply interested in Trump. I'm deeply interested in people saying what they think is true without being shouted down by name callers. And I think that if the president or any other figure is not allowed to give what is a complete within bounds view, don't disrespect the flag, that's not a crazy thing to say. If you can't say that without being called a racist, then I don't think I can either. And I want to jealously guard my right to say what I think is true. Do you see what I mean?
I totally agree. But as I said before, it's one thing to have a conversation of you disagreeing with the president's comments, which I thought the president, he shared the sentiment, of many Americans because a lot of people don't like the flag being disrespected. That's totally reasonable. But I did disagree with the president getting involved in a private business and telling them what to do. That's one argument. But to suggest that it was based on race, that the president came to this conclusion, as I said, is intellectually dishonest. But the problem is that when people make those outrageous claims, it shuts down the debate. And I would encourage people that are on the right that typically go with the left on this issue, that it happens to every Republican, no matter if it was Donald Trump or Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz. This is what they do to all Republicans, all conservative, until you're faced with somebody that looks like me and you can't go around on TV calling me a racist black man.
But if the long-term consequences of it are profound, and if you look at the polling, people increasingly distrust each other, they hate each other, they fear each other, and there are a lot of reasons for it, but this kind of news coverage is one of the reasons. If you're telling people constantly, you are hated, there's a conspiracy against you, you're never going to get a fair shake, the people in power want to kill you, without any evidence. By the way, if there's ever any evidence that the president or anyone else has attitudes like that, I'll be the first to denounce them, and I mean that.
Oh, me too.
But if there's no evidence, you shouldn't say it, right?
Right, and I'm a crazy libertarian, so anytime the government gets out of line, I'm quick to address that. But again, Tucker, if the media truly is interested in having a national conversation, then they would be more responsible with their reporting, because this doesn't help the national conversation. As a matter of fact, Tucker, this keeps people from the table having spirited conversation. I understand people getting angry and upset. People get mad at what I say. But at the end of the day, you can't call every time someone says something that you dislike racist. It shuts down the conversations.
Yeah, I don't think we're dealing with people who want to have a conversation.
Well, they're not rational. And the thing is, they need to be held responsible for it. People shouldn't be supporting these organizations if they continue to just spew out hate. They're just as bad as the people that they accuse of being racist.
I'm sorry. I want to say Monique is still sitting here next to me, and she's responding in a way that suggests I want to put her back on TV to respond.
Go ahead.
To you. Monique, I don't think you're sold.
No, I don't think it's convincing at all, because everything that we just heard is the line we hear over and over again in order to not have a voice and a say when racism really is an issue.
So, Monique, does the president
whistle,
not attack all groups of people? Just answer that simple question.
Un momento. The dog whistle has turned into a megaphone.
That's a nice talking point, but you're not answering the question, Monique.
The bulliest of the bulliest pulpits in the
nice talking
world.
Point, Monique.
Right.
And when I know you're chiming in, but
I mean,
when
it's
the
not,
president over and over again says things that are reminiscent of the you know what? The fact that he is an equal opportunity insulter doesn't mean that he doesn't insult people of color along color lines.
No, it just means he insults everyone.
And that does not excuse him.
It's not a crime to be insulted. It's not racist to be insulted.
It is not.
Can I ask you a question that I've been thinking this whole time? Do you feel, since you're on television, a lot of people are watching you, any responsibility at all to be responsible and fact-based in your comments?
Yes.
Do you have any sense of what you're saying? What effect that has on how people feel about each other? You don't seem to care.
I have a concern that I speak truth and that I speak facts. If the facts that I speak,
that's not an evidence at all.
If the facts that I speak and the analysis, which is opinion, and I'm sure everybody who's on TV right now knows that, if my factual analysis is based on truth, then the fact that it may concern you, Tucker, or it may scare you, or it may upset you, really is necessary, because then what I'm sharing with you
don't have facts, actually, and that's the troubling. If we were debating the tax code, I would say, look, we differ. I think your economics are wrong.
Right.
We're talking about something that is based on America's original sin, and that is an open wound to this day.
Yes.
And we
and
should
I think
talk
on
about
the basis of no facts, you were making it worse.
What was that original sin? The original sin wasn't, yes, but it wasn't the bounds of slavery physically. It was the notion that one race, being whites, is superior to another. And that's what we're still seeing. We're seeing the once
But you have no evidence for that.
How can you say that there's no evidence for it when people are dying in the streets simply because
you can talk
of
about
their
that
color?
without calling everybody racist.
That's racism.
Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Thanks, Tucker.
Enjoying this. Monique, thank you. Lawrence, thank you.
Thank you again.
We just heard CNN anchor Chris Cuomo, his views on things. Let's just say you can't get enough of Chris Cuomo. You want to hear more Chris Cuomo, but you don't want to have to watch CNN to get it. You're in luck. We have more later in the show. Greatest hits from Chris Cuomo. Trust me, worth it. And violence from Antifa becoming routine, and now a librarian far from libertarian at NYU, says violence is necessary for the good of the country. Alan Dershowitz of Harvard here to weigh in on that next. Political fanaticism on campus keeps getting more intense, but at the same time also more routine. At New York University, librarian April Hathcock says that violence by Antifa isn't simply indefensible, but necessary. Quote, fighting oppression is messy, Hathcock wrote in a recent essay, and that's okay. It's still vitally worth doing. So far, there are no signs that Hathcock's job is in danger. Alan Dershowitz is the author of Trumped Up. He's also a retired Harvard Law School professor who has frequently spoken on various campuses, including last night at Columbia University in New York, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So you are a First Amendment absolutist, self-described, and I think your career attests to that. Where's the line? Is it okay, from the perspective of a school administration, to have an employee advocate political violence?
Well, I think employees are different than students because they're supposed to be role models. Students are supposed to listen to them. NYU is a private university, and I think the president would be well within his rights to fire a professor who advocates violence, particularly to students, because it's students who are joining Antifa. It's growing by leaps and bounds, and he's justifying not only violence, but violence to suppress free speech and academic freedom. I guess the implication of what he's saying is if a teacher gets up in class and pronounces a view that he regards as sexist, it would be okay for the students to get up and beat up the teacher.
Right.
Or like the student the other day in New York, in the Bronx, pull out a knife and kill a fellow student who was expressing a contrary view. Where does it end if one side can use violence to stop oppression? Oppression is in the eye of the beholder. What does the other side do in response? Well, it'll be warfare.
That is a wise point that is often overlooked by the advocates of squelching speech. So you've said recently that you are considering suing Cal Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley, for suppressing free speech. Explain your case.
Well, I was invited by a group of students to speak at Berkeley about Israel, and I generally am supportive of Israel and the two-state solution. The Berkeley administration has said that they won't allow me to speak because I didn't give them 8 weeks advance notice, but there's an exception to the 8-week rule. If you're invited by a department, you don't have to give an 8-week notice. Now,
Right.
Who's invited by departments? Radicals, liberals, people of the left, and anti-Israel speakers. Speakers like me, a moderate liberal who supports Israel, we generally don't get invited by departments. So what we've done now is asked a number of departments to invite us. If no department invites us, having invited people on the other side, we will sue them, arguing that the 8-week rule is a cover for content-based discrimination against moderates, liberals, conservatives, and supporters of Israel.
What do you think you'll find when they produce the schedule and list of speakers they've invited to campus?
Well, I have no doubt that anti-Israel speakers are invited by departments all the time, all over the United States. And often when an anti-Israel speaker has been invited and groups want to have me come to present the other side, the school won't invite me. The departments won't invite me. That happened at a number of universities. And we're testing Berkeley at this point to see if it happens there. Look, this is not being done for test. I'm going to California to visit my members of my family, and I was invited to speak at the school, and I wanted to present to the students the liberal case for Israel. And if Berkeley won't let me do it, it's a public university, and I have a legal recourse which I intend to take. I hope Berkeley will allow me to speak. Either a department will invite me, or the school will change the rule, because the rule has all kind of potential for misuse. It says you need to give 8 weeks if you're a high-profile person. What does that mean? If the President of the United States said, I want to speak at Berkeley, they would make him wait 8 weeks? What if some liberal activist, famous actor or actress decided to speak? You think they would really make them wait 8 weeks? I think it's much too vague a term to satisfy the requirements of the First Amendment for a public university.
Yeah, Noam Chomsky is not waiting 8 weeks to attack Israel on the campus of Berkeley. Is there any precedent for a suit like yours?
I've never heard of a precedent for the 8-week rule, so there's no precedent for my suit, but I think it's a very strong suit. I think Berkeley will realize it's a strong suit, and I think in the end they will allow me to speak. But if they don't, they have to comply with the rule of law, including the First Amendment.
You're a brave man. Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Bizarre new revelations tonight in the case of that alleged NSA leaker reality winner. Among other things, she hated Fox News so much, she filed a formal complaint against the television set. That and more details just ahead. Judge Roy Moore won the Alabama Republican Senate primary earlier this week, and he won it easily. He beat incumbent Luther Strange by almost 10 points. Now, Moore won despite unrelentingly hostile press coverage, not to mention a bumpy political history. Moore has been removed twice from the Alabama Supreme Court by judicial discipline panels. People in that state's richest zip codes consider him a buffoon and maybe dangerous. Luther Strange and his allies, by contrast, had almost universal support from Republican leaders in the state and across the country, many of whom he considers friends. Luther Strange is a decent person. Nobody denies that. By some calculations, he outspent Roy Moore by 7-1. And most significant of all, Luther Strange had the enthusiastic endorsement of Donald Trump, who remains immensely popular in the state of Alabama, and yet he lost anyway. It was remarkable. What are the lessons here exactly? Well, first, it's getting harder to call the Trump phenomenon a cult of personality. Now, that may come as news to the press corps and indeed to the president himself, both of whom assume it's all about Trump's personal appeal, shooting someone on Fifth Avenue and all that. But it turns out that's not really true. If it were true, Luther Strange would be a senator right now, and the latest health care bill would be law. Trump supported both of those. His voters did not. It's now pretty clear the Trump movement is not primarily about Donald Trump. The president is popular and powerful when he's taking on the establishment of both parties, but he's diminished when he's aligned with them. The message is bigger than the man. So what's the message? Well, the same as it always was. Our elites have failed. That message resonates because it's true. For decades, the country has watched as the leaders of both parties sell them out, putting the interests of multinational corporations, D.C. lobbyists, even foreign countries ahead of the concerns of Americans. They're enraged by this, not surprisingly, and they'll consider backing almost anybody who fights back against it. That's why Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders and Roy Moore all did far better than predicted. Now, when you look closely, the three don't seem to have much in common at all. But take a few steps back. Their messages are essentially the same. The people in charge don't care about you. Try something else. It's all pretty obvious when you think about it, though for some reason virtually nobody in Washington ever seems to figure it out. They are shocked and appalled every time it happens. They wonder what's wrong with voters. They never seem to consider what's wrong with themselves. Well, do you remember Reality Winner? She's the NSA employee arrested earlier this year for leaking classified secrets. Now, according to newly filed court documents, her behavior was not just odd, but bizarre. Fox's Peter Ducey has been on this story all day, and he joins us with details. What is this?
So, Tucker, the final straw for this NSA translator named Reality Winner that made her stuff classified material into her pantyhose and then head for the door was that the NSA had intel in an NSA database that had classified reporting about Russian election interference that the public had not been briefed on, and she thought that they should know because she figured that sources and methods had already been compromised anyway. But shortly after sneaking the material in her pantyhose past guards at the NSA's outpost at Fort Gordon Military Reservation in Georgia and mailing it to the news outlet The Intercept, the FBI followed digital footprints to her front door, and that is when she said part of her problem with the NSA was Fox News on TV. Page 58 of the FBI interview transcript. She says this: "I guess it's just been hard at work because, and I've filed formal complaints about them having Fox News on, you know? Just at least for God's sake put Al Jazeera on, or a slideshow with people's pets. I've tried everything to get that changed." Reality Winner also left a lot of clues on Facebook and chats with her sister, and one of them, the suspected leaker, says this, quote, "Look, I only say I hate America like 3 times a day. I'm no radical. It's mostly just about Americans' obsession with air conditioning." And her sister said back, "But you don't actually hate America, right?" And Reality said, "I mean, yeah, I do. It's literally the worst thing to happen on the planet. We invented capitalism, the downfall of the environment." And Tucker, something else that is extraordinary in these documents, they are interviewing her, the FBI, at her house, and they say, "Okay, anything else classified on your desk back at the NSA that we need to know about?" And she said, "Well, I have a picture of Anderson Cooper that's signed, but the autograph is not real." And they say, "But no classified information?" And she said, "Oh, no. Just the stuff in the pantyhose."
Picture of Anderson Cooper with an ersatz autograph. Peter, that was fantastic.
Thanks, Tucker.
I'm really glad you came tonight. Thank you.
you.
Well, up next, Facebook, one of the most powerful companies in the history of the world. Is it evil? Up next, we'll discuss Facebook's drive to censor fake news while collaborating with authoritarian foreign governments and squelching content to their benefit in exchange for profit. Plus, Fox correspondent Rich Edson squares off against a former Obama administration spokeswoman in this week's final exam. Ooh, it's a close one, too. Stay tuned. CNN's Chris Cuomo is an awfully busy man. Some days he's doing what he can to worsen America's racial divide, doing a pretty good job on that. Others, he's warning regular Americans it's illegal to read leaked emails embarrassing Hillary Clinton. But even with that packed schedule, he still takes time to post videos like this on Facebook, and we're glad he does.
First, the good news. Rose is back. Show yourself, Rose. Yay! Rose just got married. We're all very happy. All right, now back to the serious stuff. I'm keeping this up here. The hashtag stand firm. Please use it. Why? Fight injustice, reinforce morality. Okay, that's what the firm part stands for. It applies to everything. Look at Puerto Rico. There are problems there with the recovery, not the storm. That's obvious. By now, you better know that because the coverage has been complete. You should see it. You should understand it. You should connect to it. Why aren't they getting more help to the places that need it faster? We have to push for accountability. We know that there's some intention there. We know the president was slow to it, but we have to get after it. This also applies to this healthcare mess. They don't have the votes. The president shouldn't say that they do. That's not optimism. It's being deceptive. You need truth. You need accuracy. And lastly, on taxes, you need details because what came out helps the haves, not the have-nots. Have a great day.
Great job.
Well, this video raises a lot of questions, some of them theological. What exactly is Chris Cuomo talking about? What office is he running for? Do Chris Cuomo and the rest of us exist in the true reality or in a strange cartoonist simulated universe? Where in the world did this come from? And in a world where Chris Cuomo has a TV show, what has meaning? What is virtue? Does God exist? These are questions that arise when we watch these videos. We're going to try to find answers. Updates later in the week. Well, 15 years ago, Facebook didn't even exist. Today, it's one of the world's most powerful companies, the biggest news company in history. As a result, it's important to ask what Facebook is doing with all the information they gather and with all the power they wield. Can they be trusted? Scott Cleland wrote a book about this, about big tech companies, search and destroy. You can't trust Google Inc. He joins us tonight. Scott, you're one of the few who's really thought deeply about this. And the core question right now about Facebook is, can we trust Mark Zuckerberg and his staff not to censor news?
Well, what you need to look at is Facebook is a series of conflicts. It's a hot mess of conflicts. So, first of all, it's an unaccountable monopoly that's in the influence business. It's an autocracy that's pretending to be a democracy. You then have this black box technology that tells everybody else has to be completely transparent. Then you have a media company who actually will live broadcast murder, torture, and rape with no editorial on it at all. Then you have a self-appointed regulator of free speech that claims to be neutral. And then you also have a self-appointed political organizer and a power broker with a mission that's very political saying, oh, I'm not political, you can trust me. Now, it's okay, whatever their politics are, but when you try and say you're not political, their new mission, which Mark Zuckerberg gave us just in June, give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. Now, anybody that has a sense about politics knows the word power is politics is power.
Well, of course it is. So Facebook clearly has a political agenda. They're clearly hostile to certain worldviews, and it seems like they have a history of squelching certain parts of the news in order to please foreign governments.
And that's a problem. You know, when you're an autocracy, a technological autocracy, about half of the countries or more, depending on how you judge it, are autocracies. So they have despots that run them. And when you have a company that's 2 billion users and your value, they're the most valuable company in the world, their value comes on how many users they have and how much they're used. And so if an autocratic company says, hey, country, you do this, they comply. Meanwhile, they're saying we're neutral and we're not political.
But they engage in censorship on behalf of authoritarian governments.
Yes, because that's the deal they've made, is they know that they're valuable because many people use it.
So they suck up to dictators in order to make money, but we have to trust them as the largest news organization in history not to censor our news, to influence us with propaganda. Why would we trust them to do that?
Well, you know, like anything, you need to take anything with a grain of salt. The reason you shouldn't trust them here is on fake news and fake ads. You know, you say, how could that happen? Well, they're the most profitable ads because somebody designed them to be viral, meaning that they were like clickbait or, you know, just something that people can't resist. And that's what, and that's algorithmically detectable. Because if you see somebody who's doing viral stuff and it's of a certain type, an algorithm can figure it out because it's a pattern. And so what is, you know, really, I think a problem here is that they're like an arms merchant in war, where they make their most money when people are politically divided, and they make less if people aren't passionate and at peace.
It sounds ominous that they have more power than any information company's ever had. Scott, thank you for that and
Thank
for all
you.
the work you've done on it. Final exam is next. Which of these two D.C. news aficionados has actually been paying attention to the news this week? Only one can win. We'll be right back. Despite our claims, there is a test on this show. Time now for Final Exam, where we find out whether the people who work in the news actually read and retain the news. This week, a special edition, we have a clash of foreign policy experts. Marie Harf, of course, is a former spokeswoman for the Obama State Department. She'll be facing off with Fox News State Department correspondent Rich Edson. Holy smokes, here are the rules. I'm not going to ask if you're nervous because I can feel it coming off in waves.
I have been studying all week for this examination, and I'm prepared.
Dario has actually got money out with the cameraman on this. I'm not going to win. Okay, put your hands on the buzzers. I'm going to ask the questions. The first one to press down on the buzzer will get to answer it.
Okay.
We'll go to the tape to show whether you're right or not. Each correct answer is worth a point. Each incorrect answer detracts a point from your total. There are 5 questions. The person with the most wins. All right? You ready?
Ready.
Here we go. Question 1. NFL players not the only ones taking a knee this week. On the floor of the House of Representatives, this Texas congresswoman dropped to her knee in protest of the president. Who was it?
Sheila Jackson Lee.
Sheila Jackson Lee, says Rich Edson. Let's go to the tape.
I kneel in honor of them. I kneel in honor of the First Amendment. I kneel because the flag is a symbol for freedom. I kneel because I'm going to stand against racism.
Rich watches C-SPAN all day.
Yes, it's State Department TV. There's nothing else to watch.
That was the sum total of her legislative achievement in this Congress, by the way. Okay, the first point goes to you, Mr. Edson.
Do I control the board, or is that a different one?
But you both wait
You
for
can't
question
buy a vowel
2,
either.
which is right here. This week, Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee announced he will not seek re-election next year. Reports have emerged that Super Bowl winning quarterback
Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning.
Peyton Manning.
I hit it first.
Senator Bob Corker is retiring at the end of his term in 2018. One name already floating around to replace him, NFL legend Peyton Manning.
Peyton Manning, Senator. Sounds pretty good.
My light was I don't know if I can participate.
Okay.
The
Did you?
system's not
Okay,
rigged.
because you seemed to hit it first, but your light went off, and you guessed Peyton Manning as well. We're going to award you each a point. I'm going to override the judges on this. That's right, and make a decision on the fly.
Larry, withdraw the protest. We're good.
Okay, perfect.
We
need to fix those lights clearly. Okay, third question. Which transgender document leaker was just turned away at the Canadian border because of a criminal record? Marie Harf.
Chelsea Manning.
Chelsea Manning. To the tape we go.
Canada welcomes refugees with open arms, but it's leaving Chelsea Manning at the door. The convicted government leaker says the country denied her entry because it considers her crimes to be treason.
Holy smokes. So now we have 2-2.
Ooh.
With only 3 questions answered, we have a total of 4 points on the board.
System
The
seems
weird
rigged to me.
mathematical alchemy of final exam.
Okay.
Okay, next question. Which Supreme Court justice is blaming Hillary Clinton's loss on sexism?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, says Rich Edson. To the tape.
You think sexism played a role in that campaign?
Do I think so?
Yes.
I have no doubt that it did. There's so many things that might have been decisive, but that was a major factors.
There are no term limits, we should point out, on the Supreme Court. And you were correct. Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yes.
Okay, so now it's 2-3.
With
On
2.
the final question, now I'm going to ask that I complete the question before you buzz in.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. This is a multiple choice one. Women in Saudi Arabia now have the right to drive. Men can begin driving at the age of 18. How old do Saudi women have to be before getting their license? Here are the choices. Is it 15, Is it 20 years old or is it 30 years old? Maria Harf.
20.
20, says the former State Department spokeswoman. To the tape.
This new decree does have restrictions. Women will have to be at least 30 years old to get a driver's license. They'll only be able to drive within city limits and only during certain hours.
20 years old. In the Saudi Arabia of your dreams can women drive at 20, but in the real Saudi Arabia, they have to wait 10 more years.
I'm devastated.
So are they.
I can't even look at Rich right now.
Sorry.
So
all about ball control.
That was very impressive to you both.
I'm never going to live this
Rich
down.
Edson,
thank you.
You win. But I have to say, you get a strong consolation prize, Maria Harf.
There are no second places here. Come on.
There is on this show.
Okay. Thanks, Tucker.
Thank you both.
Thanks.
And at home, pay attention to the news over the next week. Another final exam is coming your way next Thursday. Talking to Sean Hannity next. He's got the show after ours. Stay tuned. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 p.m. to the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and especially groupthink. DVR it if you haven't already. We've got a big show tomorrow. Don't miss it. Good night from Washington. Sean Hannity's fourth night at 9 p.m. Coming up, he's interviewing Rush Limbaugh. We're going to rush out and watch